Is this what you're hearing in the marketplace, these types of concerns in general about the market? And if that is the case, how do you address that from a sales and marketing process standpoint?
Firstly, our belief is that there's been a very significant change in the approach from our sales perspective. It used to be that it was very much product driven first. So you'd say that the product was primary and then the development team was almost secondary. So you would notice that in the creative, in the brochures, in your flip books, in your presentation, that you would begin with the product and you would end almost as a side note as this is who the developer is, this is who the team is. Whereas now we've made a very, very significant shift in that. So now it is team, developer, the vision of the developer, who's involved, all of those things are the primary component. Because in our view, if you can't get someone on board with that first, and you can't showcase delivery, that someone's genuine about delivering a product, then you're not going to be able to sell them the product. So we've flipped everything on its head. Essentially within our presentations, we might spend 20 to 30 minutes speaking about the developer to begin with. We like to humanise them as a person, and it's what you spoke about before, that they're real, genuine people that are looking to deliver something. We like to spend as much time with the developers prior to launch as possible to really understand who they are, what they're trying to deliver, so that we can pass that on to the client or the buyer that's in front of us. And then it's about saying your developers, your architects, landscape architects, etc. You've actually got to show completed work that they've done before, and that's a long process before you even get to the product. So that's how we've approached it, and then it's about product. So we can spend 20, 30 minutes speaking about the developer, then 20, 30 minutes speaking about the product before we even get to a floor plan at the end, because if they're not convinced on all of that, then you have no chance from that point onwards.
Thanks, Steve. Good summary. Slightly different perspective where we come from, because obviously working with a developer that's got a fully integrated business model as a builder as well. Approximately 4 years ago when I joined Pace, one of the challenges that Shane had was he'd very much built a very successful business that delivered a very homogenous product. It was very strong in the investor first home buyer market. And as he went about acquiring some sites in some more affluent areas, he didn't really have the understanding or the appreciation and the importance of a brand and the credibility that comes with that and the aspiration that is actually built within that. So we went around on a mission of reassessing our values, dealing with better consultants, rebranding, new website, becoming an employer of choice. And all these things now for us are feeding into effectively what these people are talking about, and that is creating a level of trust and leveraging our history of 30 years within this Melbourne marketplace and delivering over 100 projects. The way we go about doing things today is very much understanding of putting a cap on of what would we expect if we were selling to our mum, our dad, what would we expect if we were buying into a project ourselves. And one of the things, there are many that I could talk to, that I found when I joined this company was that the builder dictated to the developer in regards to a value management process. And we very quickly needed to change the cap, that the developer was in fact the client, and we dictated to the builder in regards to the non-negotiables and what it is that we were aiming for as far as our vision, and ensuring that we executed on those core promises. And that is something that's still a challenge to today, particularly with obviously rising construction prices. But at the end of the day, if you take a customer service centric approach, which I continue to have issues within the business, because obviously you've got a CFO that's counting the beans, you've got a construction director that is being strangled to keep things as cheap as possible. But if we can always bring it back to a customer-centric approach of ensuring that we deliver on what we should be doing to continue to build this brand to being a major player, and something that we're proud of when we drive past these development sites in years to come.
I think you guys doing the project, particularly in Fitzroy, is going to be a ripper. I think it's good. So in terms of, you spoke a bit about what it was like before, how it's evolving. So if you kind of look back over the last 24 months and you describe what that was like, do you see that kind of reverting back to more of a product-based approach, or do you think the kind of genie's out of the bottle, consumers are really focused on the team stuff, or do you think there's going to be more of a hybrid moving forward? How do you see that playing out?
I think that it has to start with the team, in my view. I think that if you can't get buy-in on the team, then the product, you can have the shiny product there, but if you're not convinced of the delivery, then I don't think you'll see people actually transacting. And not forgetting that it's one of the most important decisions of their lives. So particularly if you're a downsizer, where there's a very real experience that they'll say to us, this might be the last home that we ever live in. And I don't think we should take that for granted. I think that's really important to recognise that this person will see out their life there. We need to be conscious of that. And if they don't have buy-in on the team that's involved, the product is irrelevant, in my view.
And over the next wee period, as the market heats up, do you think people are going to be more just focused on the product, or do you think this is going to stay like this moving forward?
I think what's interesting, and this is what we're finding across the market at the moment, is that particularly through Melbourne, we're finding that people are very stagnant. So when we get through to the end of a process and someone doesn't proceed, of course, we always ask the question, why is it that you're not proceeding? And it used to be that they might buy another product, for example, and in which case there were some learnings from that, which I think you could reflect on and you could work through. But at the moment, we're finding that a lot of people are actually just staying put. They're just saying, we don't see enough value in the product to make the move. And there, I think the way that we need to approach that as collectively is that we all think we have great products. You've got a good product. I've got a good development. Well, in this current market, good is not good enough, right? The way that we want to frame it at the moment is that it actually needs to be compelling. It needs to be compelling because you're actually asking someone to leave their family home of 30 years. And what that means for them is that it's such a big decision that it has to be compelling. So if you come at it with that mindset, I think that you have a better opportunity to actually get them across the line. Yeah.
Obviously, you said Pace's product is evolving right now. You've got a mix of different things, but I think the thing that's consistent with all consumers is that there are trade-offs. In this case, it's a $5 million home. For others, it might be renting versus buying or whatever it may be. What are the conversations happening in the display suites in relation to how those trade-offs and how the consumers are thinking about that for Pace?
Steve touched on a really good point, which was obviously recalibrating expectations. But given that we have a pipeline of, say, a dozen projects, over 1,000 properties throughout Melbourne, it gives us a great insight in regards to dealing with first home buyers between 8 and 10,000 a square metre, midpoint maybe 12 to 14, and then up to Fitzroy where we're north of 20,000 a square metre. And each one has its own challenges. So for first home buyers, just quickly, we're working through affordability and borrowing capacity issues. So we're partnering up with some second tier sort of lenders that aren't applying a 300 basis point buffer to your mortgage rate of 6.5. They're getting assessed on 9.5. They could have borrowed 700. They're coming back and being told they're borrowing 450. So we're working very closely, whether it be with Pepper, whether it be with Latrobe, whether it be with First Mac, for example, and we're trying to find lenders that are cutting it fine in regards to where they can actually get a mortgage rate that still allows us to sell a one bed at 500. It still allows us to sell a two bed between 6 and 7. The midpoint ones are interesting. They're often professional people. They can buy a single front Victorian, but they're looking at apartment because it doesn't need the renovation. For them, it's all instilling not an element of fear, but an element of you're buying something brand new, so you're taking away the stress levels of obviously having to buy something and then potentially borrow more in the future. And then your downsizes, as Steve touched on, it's incredibly an emotional decision because obviously change forces that on people. For us and them, it's instilling confidence that it's a lifestyle. The change will bring that new lifestyle and the benefits that will come from it. We had an issue. We had an agent go out to a house in Toorak. That came back as a lower valuation. They thought it was worth more. We're encouraging obviously some other agents that we know of to go in there and tell them what it realistically is worth. But the other thing is that what it will be worth in 2 years, and trying to look at the economic horizon and not be economists or accountants per se, but if we know that there's a new line in the sand in regards to construction costs and it's not coming back, it's not getting any cheaper, we all know that. Quality sites are not getting any cheaper, that they may see the benefit of uplift in their home and buying on today's prices, which is often a narrative that many off-the-plan project marketeers will use when a project's not being delivered for 12, 24, 36 months out. So it's asking lots of questions, as any good salesperson would, understanding the individual circumstances of the particular buyer, shutting up, understanding what those things are, and then tailoring a response to ensure that you're hitting not just the brain but the heart to be able to use whatever persuasive skills and logic that needs to come with helping people make a decision in an environment where consumer sentiment is obviously one of our greatest challenges.
100%, yeah. And one of the things we track very closely is looking at how much product usage, how much time does people spend on our product prior to making an inquiry, and then we survey all consumers 48 hours after how they got on with the agent, and then a period after that to ask if they purchased. And what we're seeing now is people staying on the product for longer before submitting an inquiry. So there's a bit of uncertainty there where back 3 years ago it was more they get to the site, they kind of search for something, they make an inquiry. We're starting to see that we've seen the same thing occur. So not only is it taking them longer to submit that first inquiry, it's also taking them longer to then transact. Are you guys seeing the same thing? If you are, how do you manage it? What's working?
So we've changed our approach of understanding that lead nurture programs now are not 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks. Lead nurture programs are now in our CRM that go out to 12, 18 months. And understanding that people will engage with you when they're prepared to engage with you, so you need to be a bit more forthcoming. And I know that this might be disagreed by some people in the industry in regards to how much information do you provide until you actually obviously get the data that you need. And we need to be more flexible in that space in providing that environment where people feel comfortable that they really control the card in regards to when they're prepared to engage with us. Obviously, Urban are very good, particularly with a verification process of ensuring that the data they provide to us developers, that the lead is legitimate and, unlike many of your competitors, has a phone number, which is great. So it has changed. Lead nurture programs are pushed out significantly. What does your content look like? How relevant is it? How often is it refreshed? Is it actually segmented into cohorts of buyers so that the narrative is different to a first-home buyer than it is to someone downsizing into a $5 or a $10 million penthouse? But most importantly, knowing full well that the days of not putting a floor plan or a price, or at least knowing strategically when to disclose that information in the campaign, is a critical component to maybe flushing out people that just don't want to talk to a salesperson. It's like buying a car. I think the car industry is a little bit further advanced. They're now providing all the information out there. People can transact online. People can actually buy a car without speaking to a car dealership. We're heading that way. Consumers king.
From our experience, it's been much the same. There's two distinct camps of buyers. There's people that are ready to transact pretty quickly from inquiring, so within a 4-week period. I mean, that's pushed out as well. So sort of this idea that you could sign a contract on first appointment, it just doesn't really exist anymore. So there's that element. And then there's the second piece, which is there's the other camp of buyers which come in very early, and we find that it's usually anywhere from a 6 to 12 month time frame until they're actually ready to actually purchase at that point. So from our side and from the team side, it's really about nurturing that buyer through that experience, following them up diligently, etc. And then the other piece that has been a huge shift in our business has been, we kept hearing that the buyer journey extends out, so it's 18 months. And I sort of questioned myself and said, my first thought was, how does that help me? Because I just want the buyer that's ready now. That's what I'm after.
We've heard that one many times before.
Give me that one. So then I think when you look at it and you say, well, how can I use that to my advantage, or what does that mean for us as a sales agency? One of the things that we've done is actually look at beginning the sales campaign significantly earlier than usual. So I think typically everyone's waiting for renders, they're waiting for full creative, etc. Whereas what we've done is we've utilised predominantly social media, and we've actually started advertising 3-4 months out from when we would even have launch or even have renders. And that's been a really interesting experience for us because, as an example, we've got a project that's launching in Rye soon, and we started marketing 4 months ago. We've booked a full grand launch weekend of appointments off the back of a picture of a wave and a facade sketch, right? And I think that really changes the paradigm when you look at that and you say, well, maybe we don't need all of these different items to actually get a launch out there. And maybe we need to start thinking about starting these things earlier so that we can actually capture that buyer and begin the journey 4 months ago prior to launch and give us enough runway to work with those buyers leading into that time. And then in addition to that, what it means is that you've built up momentum so that you're having a genuine conversation, which is, we've got one spot left on Sunday. And as agents, we might say that we've got one spot left, the whole day's free. If you can actually say that and there's conviction around it, I think it makes a huge difference.
Just talking to that just a little bit more, I think the project marketing salesperson needs to adopt the mindset of the established agent. If we look at those that are the most successful in the established agency, they don't get listings every day just because they've been called in off a letter drop. If you look at the success of Mark Weisel, if you look at the success of James Tostovan, these guys nurture relationships for 2, 5, even longer years, and that is the mindset that needs to be created. And the quicker they do that, given that we've now been in a challenging market post-COVID for a few years, the quicker they'll realise that they just can't expect to have cash in their wallet overnight based on a 24 or 48-hour conversation. So the most successful people have already moved their mindset into that space. It's playing the long game.
Just on that too, something that's really important, which everyone would be recognised now, is that there's no hard close in this market. There is no ability to just hard close someone. If you don't sign by tomorrow, it's going to be sold. If you're not hard closing, it has to come down to relationship. Relationship is the only way through.
You know, I think we all know that it's particularly trickier in some parts of the market, whether it's kind of high and low end, whatever it is. It feels like there are multiple tracks running in the market. I know there are developers in the room at the moment that are sitting on development sites thinking about, when do we go? And so from your perspective, what are the signals that you're looking for from the marketplace to say, now's the time to go?
Well, I certainly have a view that the market in Melbourne the fundamentals are all there. We've read all the articles. We know the details. So
There's plenty of them on Urban.
yeah, I don't want to labour that point. Like, we're all aware that it's coming. The key thing that we're saying with developers is to get into market, to commence construction, to be underway, and not miss the boat when the market turns. So yes, it requires a sense of conviction, but we're there for the journey as well, and we would encourage it to say that you should get into market, you should get into construction most importantly, and then that during the construction journey, I certainly couldn't predict when it's going to happen, but I believe that it will happen during that time, and then you'll be able to reap the benefits of it at that point.
We spoke about this last week.
Yeah, we tried to swim against the tide a little bit last year because we weighed up the balance of, we knew that we're in an environment that was incredibly challenging, that we took the view that it was better to be in the market because no one else was in the market. So we had very little competition. So we were talking to a more captive audience. But the challenge that we had was trying to work out what should we be selling these at, given that up until recently where we got stability in construction pricing, we just weren't quite sure what the build price was going to be. So that had the extra element of risk that was attached to it as well. So to answer the exact question of how do we actually check the depth of the market to be able to launch a project, Coburg, for example, we're doing over 300. We had 170 banked up until February of last year. And I then threw the hook back out into the water, or the line back out, November of last year, just to see, for the fear of so much potentially coming on first quarter this year, to see what depth was there. Now, we didn't transact a lot prior to December, but we're beginning to see already this year there's a bit more positivity and confidence. And I think the consumer's beginning to think like us as an industry. When this does move, it'll move quickly because we know that there's built up demand and we know that probably interest rates have peaked and hopefully are coming off. We're all very confident back 6 months of this year. I just hope we start to see a little bit more momentum in the first 6 months because that'll be a nice little segue into hopefully not an avalanche of stock coming on, but enough to maybe feed the demand that has been building up as a result of everyone being sitting on their hands.
This is the last question I'm going to ask, and then I'll throw over to questions. So have a think about if you've got something you'd like to ask. Your time's coming up. So if you could kind of wave a magic wand and have a project in any particular area in Melbourne right now, and whether it's by location or it's a price point thing or it's a certain aspect of the project, what do you think the kind of key drivers of successful projects are going to be this year?
Oh, you'd just be following Tim Gurner because everywhere he goes is just gold, isn't it? But putting that aside, if you had that magic wand, the only place it's really been is middle ring, outer ring, townhouses up to 650. They're liked a lot by the channels. They're liked a lot by, obviously, purchasers that feel that they're getting a little bit of land, they're getting a little bit of construction, and they can afford to borrow. Boys from Orchid Piper might know a bit more about this, but there's probably a position in the most affluent parts of Melbourne, in the best streets, partnering with the best developers and the best builders, where price might not be the issue, but any one of those that is slightly diluted, it probably becomes then another challenging sort of conversation. But for us, all I'm hearing that's probably been the last 12 or 18 months, which has been a good space to be, is not necessarily the house and land, but just the townhouse product market up to 650 has been strong. That's about all I can add to that. Everything else has been a little bit of a challenge for us.
I'd say from our side, I'd agree that if you have an A-plus site and you have the potential to push it really hard, like there's an audience, and again, it's compelling, what we were talking about before. Outside of that, I think if you are just on one of your sort of typical main roads, High Street, Malvern Road, etc., one of the things that I would probably consider is price point at the end, because look, we've had some developments throughout the year that have held the number one spots on many different platforms for lead generation, and some of them were actually quite surprising to us. One in particular had 65 square metre twos and 75 square metre twos. And I hadn't seen them in quite some time. And thinking about it, I thought, geez, these are quite small, and how is this going to be received? And in all honesty, that's what the purchaser said as well. They said, oh, geez, these are quite small. But ultimately, it was driven by a price point for them. So they were keen to get into the area. And I think that's part of this recalibration piece that we're going through at the moment, is that what you think you can get, you probably can't. So you have to compromise on one of two things. It's either going to be size or position. And I think there's a large audience of people that will happily compromise on size to get where they want to be. And I would just say that to developers out there, sometimes we get caught up in this idea that we have to deliver a luxury product, or that delivering a two-bedder that's 65 or 70 square metres is somehow a bad thing or a dirty word in some way, whereas it's actually giving someone an opportunity to live in that area. So I think if you reframe it that way, I think it's an interesting way to work through it, and it's certainly backed up by the data that inquiries are driven by price point, even at the expense of size.
Well, on that happy note, we'll probably just pause for 20 minutes or so. You guys enjoy some lunch, and next up, we've got the development view. Thanks very much, you guys.